feel when you see this? Or this? Or even this? If you feel that huge warm wave of nostalgia, you either grew up playing games with graphics like these because they were recent, or you like retro style or pixel-based games. If you instead feel like you want to remove your eyes with a rusty spoon, you may prefer more recent or different style games with modern, more detailed graphics. However, no matter which of these options apply to you, I'm asking you to pull up a chair, grab a coffee or tea, and hear me out for a little while. Why do you think those games worked back then and, to many gamers, still are relevant today? Why do you think that even today, developers and studios create games with these retro graphics? I don't believe that answers like, well, that was all that was technically doable back then, or well, that's all that single developers or small studios can really do due to their skills or resources, quite answer it. I believe there is more to this. If that was the whole story, why would retro or pixel-based games still work today? Here's a little story for you to illustrate my thought. My best friend in my youth was a guy called Patrick. He spent the earliest childhood years in Eastern Europe. He moved to Western Europe once the Iron Curtain opened. I, on the other hand, grew up in Western Europe. I had quite a few cool toys from franchises such as Star Wars, Masters of the Universe, or Mask. I loved that era, and of course loved those toys. They weren't just objects, they were portals. Every day after school, my room would turn into the interior of the Death Star or the surface of Eternia. My desk was an arena where the guys in Mask and Venom would slug it out. My imagination would turn those places into whatever world was part of the story I was enacting. After Patrick and me became friends, either playing soccer or lots of cool games on the C64 together, we talked about this. And he told me that in his childhood, he didn't have any toys like that. They simply weren't available in his country, and even if they had been, his parents couldn't have afforded them. So what did he do? Well, he went into the forest, gathered sticks, rifled through his dad's workshop, and he built rudimentary toys from wood, stone, metal bits. Those were his toys. And they were just as cool as mine, because his mind, his imagination would fill in the blanks, so to say. It would turn those crude items into the coolest toys. He'd fight the same battles I would, as his imagination was just as vivid. Why am I telling you all of this? Because when I, and Patrick too, got into video games, I was naturally drawn to RPGs. Those and the early flight simulators were my favorites. Sure, I had no comparison to the graphic standards of today. But still, of course I was aware that there weren't many details. Your hero was a collection of small squares. The surface often was just one color with some slightly different colors to add at least some details such as trees. I guess it didn't help that my C64 was hooked up to an old black and white TV because that was just the TV I had. But you know what? I didn't mind. Not because I had no choice, but because my mind immediately started adding details, making those games, those worlds, more lively. When playing Ultima 4, I wasn't just walking through some copy-pasted graphics of trees to get to a town illustrated by a small hut. I was running through a foreboding, dense thicket, always aware I could be ambushed by some monster. I was heading to that peaceful town in the center of the forest. When I was fighting enemies, it wasn't just two sprites shooting sprites at each other. I actually imagined a hero similar to the one on the covers of Ultima 4 and Ultima 6, throwing fireballs at that lizard. Maybe that was why I loved the artwork on these boxes and in the manuals of those games. They gave me a direction, my mind did the rest. I'd like to relate that to reading a book. When you read something like Lord of the Rings, you see what is described with those words inside your head. It's your cranial movie theater, your vision of what Tolkien described so well. You don't just see a collection of letters on paper. You don't just go, okay, here's that huge book describing how some halfling took a ring to throw it into a volcano. That's it. And to me, my imagination still works like this. To this day, when I play a classic game, what plays out in my mind is more detailed and vivid than what is on the screen. Maybe it's also a case of suspensive disbelief. When you watch an old movie with really crappy special effects, which were all that was possible back then, if you really immerse yourself into the movie, it works. You don't see the wires moving that floating item. You believe the magic that is part of that particular story. Let me give you one more example that may seem a little odd, but I think it hits quite well. Many fans of horror, and especially cosmic horror, love the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. And I think one of his most used concepts is that he would not show you the monster, so to say, would not explain it to you in the smallest details. Yes, there are a few exceptions to this rule, of course. Instead, he would describe the effect of seeing whatever it was on the protagonist. He would just hint at something, describe just some very rough details, and your mind as a reader would do the rest. You'd be kind of the co-author, with your imagination being the pen. How does this relate to those old RPGs? Well, if your hero went into the darkest dungeons and fought a Reaper, your mind would bring that Reaper to life. It would be more than just some silly-looking thing with a two-frame animation. You'd imagine being in that dungeon with your group of companions, shooting arrows and spells at those monsters. This mental co-authorship I just brought up is what I believe happened back in the day, when many games looked very basic. And it still happens when graphics are rudimentary. And there are quite a few examples of very popular and beloved recent games that use rudimentary, pixelated or retro graphics. Think Minecraft, RimWorld, Undertale or Octopath Traveler. So it works, and it works quite well, considering how successful these games are. Now, let me make one thing clear. Even though I love to play retro and classic games, I also love modern games. I enjoy being blown away by cinema-level graphics. I will never forget loading up Witcher 3 the first time in 2015, riding through that gloomy forest with the trees being moved by the wind, feeling like traveling through a new, exciting and foreboding world. I felt immersed there as well. I was trying to be Geralt. I enjoyed exploring areas. I followed the story. And this is true for more recent games too, whether it's Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Ghost of Tsushima, or Claroscure. But as weird as this may sound, this kind of experience is like watching a movie, whereas playing those old pixely games is more like reading the book. You are told the same story, the details are shown to you, whether it's in pictures or printed words. But in one case, you are told what you see, and your imagination shows it to you. It's your specific vision, your mental image of what is explained. In the other case, the game shows it to you, like in a movie or even close to real-life quality, to the slightest detail. Both are different experiences. None of them are better, are bad, or whatever. It depends on what you prefer, what you feel comfortable with, what you are used to. And even modern games with detailed graphics and a very detailed world let you use your imagination. That's why I love the Dark Souls games so much. I see the world and its atmosphere, I'm immersed in it, and my imagination fills the blanks. I imagine what the world I see used to look like in the Age of the Gods, what Leyndell or Arnolunda looked like in their heyday, what the rest of the world looked like. When I look out at the mountains in the far distance, from a high vantage point, I imagine who used to live there, what could be found there, in those parts of the world that you never get to. So, my imagination does a different job. Imagine different things that in the game, even with its amazing graphics, does not show you. It's a great experience too. So everyone has different tastes, and that's great. And we have a gazillion games, so you can exactly find what you're looking for. And if you don't like old games or games in a retro style, that is of course totally fine. Yet, what if you'd give it another try, knowing that the game will not blow you away with the cinematic scenery? What if you delve into those old worlds and let your mind do the work of making it cinematic in your imagination? Even though some of the game mechanics like DUI, the amount of grinding, whatever, sometimes didn't age well, I truly believe that those classic games don't age, because imagination does not age. Maybe the games we explored in the first Final Fantasy, or Dragon Age, or Wizardry, or Ultima games were rather small, because they had to be fit onto a few disks or needed to be processed by computers at the edge of their capability. But it was us who made these worlds big. Pixel art gives you a hint, your imagination turns it into a scene, a world. That's why people like me, and maybe you too, love those games though, where we can watch Metropolis and ignore the clunky camera tricks and the visible strings, but immerse ourselves into a fascinating world, where we don't see pixels and blocks, but towns, forests, dungeons and monsters in those games. Why Lovecraft's ideas are so hard to convert into movies or games, because it's more about an effect and what your mind imagines, while movies and games so often rely on showing you straight out. And maybe you want to try one of those classic games now. Maybe those games will captivate you too, because they still have some of that magic. They still are portals into different magical places. If you do, take your time. Adjust your mindset and expectations. Lean back and let the game pull you in. And if it doesn't work, it's fine, you know? Thank you for joining me. If you do want to try playing one of those old games or their retro style equivalents, I will soon have a video on how those kind of games used to be played in the old days. And maybe you want to check that out too. I'd love if you join me for that. So let me know what you think about today's topic. Did you grow up with those kind of games? Do you still love them? Did you try to get into them and bounced right off? Would you like to try exploring some of those almost forgotten worlds? Let me know. And in any case, thanks for being here with me and taking a glance at those forgotten worlds. Until next time, safe travels.